Okay, so my name is Rachel Tustin. I'm the president of the Society for Michaelmas 2019. If you have any questions about any part of the event or our term card more generally, please get in contact with me at president@cus.org. I'm delighted to be starting our program of events with the one and only Judge Judith Sheindlin, the presiding judge of the Emmy Award-winning Judge Judy on one of America's most well-known media personalities. She will be speaking here today on a number of things, followed by a moderated Q&A and an audience Q&A. However, before we welcome Judge Sheindlin to our chamber, we'd like to play a short video about her life and career to get this discussion started. Thank you.
I have to hope this works. First of all, most of that video was shot about 10 years ago. It's still all true today. So first, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Max, wherever you are. Are you here, Max? No? There he is. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Scarlett. I know that you're around here someplace, and to all the other wonderful people who welcomed me to Cambridge the last few days and showed me your wonderful city. People have embraced my program for almost a quarter of a century. Why? First, a program, in order to be successful, has to be entertaining. I get the comedic side of my personality from my father. He had wonderful comedic timing. He was a dentist. And he had a captive audience. Negotiating life with a sense of humor is a terrific tool. But Judge Judy the program and Judge Judy the person have a wider message that I think permeated my work for almost half a century, and I think it's really what brought most of you here today, your parents, very often your grandparents, aunts, uncles, who made you sit in front of a television when you were 6 and watch Judge Judy. I love the law. I believe that at the conclusion of a case, the result should be fair and just. If the law, as it is codified, doesn't quite fit, the law allows for massaging. That doesn't mean that judges are judicial activists. It just means that there was no internet, no cyberspace 100 years ago. So you have to massage the facts and massage the law so that they gel for a just result. That's one of the reasons that people watch my program. I believe in responsible behavior. Don't have children unless you can financially, emotionally, and physically take care of them. It's not responsible. And what happens when you engage in irresponsible behavior, somebody always suffers. My experience in the family court taught me that when you were not ready to parent, the children always suffered. It kept the family court in business. I believe you're supposed to be a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good child. You're supposed to live in a community that you support and that you nurture. I believe that you're supposed to be a responsible teacher, that your gift of teaching children and of inspiring generations is a gift, and you shouldn't take it lightly. I believe that you have a responsibility as a student. I will tell you that when one acts irresponsibly, others always suffer. Just think of the irresponsible driver who is either speeding or texting and driving. They usually take someone else with them, very often a lot of people. I am intolerant of irresponsible behavior. And I think that all of us should be intolerant of irresponsible behavior rather than making excuses for it. We've spent decades and trillions of dollars trying to figure out how to make people act more responsibly, how to rehabilitate those people who commit violent crimes. Look around. It hasn't worked. So what have we done as a society? We've said, well, that behavior really isn't so bad. This behavior, well, this behavior isn't so bad. And I'm going to give you an example of how that philosophy has destroyed the public school system in the United States, in most states. I was the product of a public school system in New York City. When I was a child, maybe 9 or 10, and I was a good kid. I wanted my parents to be proud of me. It's not that they were physically abusive, but I didn't want to disappoint them, as most of you don't want to disappoint your parents. That's why you're here. But I remember talking out of turn in class and getting a U note. It was just a little piece of paper, and it said U on it. And what you had to do was bring it home and have your parents sign it. Well, all the way home, I was trembling. And I remember that day, we're talking about almost 70 years ago, because I didn't want my parents to be disappointed in me. Well, today, schools are different. Bad children aren't expelled from school to allow the vast majority of students to learn. I call it the blueberry theory in education. I'm sure all of you have gone to the supermarket and bought a quart or a pint of blueberries. Yes? It has never, in my almost 77 years of life, been my experience that when you buy a box of blueberries that has a moldy blueberry in it, that moldy blueberry is going to make all the other blueberries well. That doesn't happen. What happens is the mold, that one moldy blueberry, infects the others. That's what happened to our public school system. I certainly know it's what happened to it in New York, my home state. Because what the progressive thinkers said was, if we keep the moldy blueberry, the one, in a class of 35, the one disruptive student, that disruptive student is going to learn from the other 35. What happened in actuality was that the other 35 students couldn't learn because the teacher's focus was on trying to keep that one child in order, prevent that one child from being a disruptive force in the class, the one child who was physically aggressive, emotionally aggressive. So that experiment widened, and it widened to the extent where teachers no longer, good teachers, when I grew up, they were my mentors, no longer wanted to teach in schools because they were afraid. They were assaulted. Other students were assaulted. And what was done, did somebody cut off my mic because they didn't like what I was saying? Today in New York City, what happens if you fail all your exams is when you're 19, you get a diploma. Everybody graduates. Well, what value, therefore, is a high school diploma? Is it a value to the same for the children who studied, worked hard, passed their exams, achieved? So I believe in responsible behavior, and I don't believe that it is responsible for a society to say, we are going to, in effect, dumb down the community that we live in order to embrace bad behavior. I think that that's a mistake. And I think that you students at Cambridge worked very hard to get here. You gave up of your time, you gave up of fun to achieve academically. And it would really rile you if you went to a class of 30 and you had 2 or 3 kids that prevented you from learning. Well, and this is a privileged school. So when you have schools that are public schools and children have no other choice but to attend, I think it's the responsibility of the community to see to it that the vast majority of kids who want to go to school and want to learn can do so in a peaceful atmosphere. Then we have decriminalized quality of life crimes. I'm very sensitive to that. Most people in New York City and other major cities where they have subways travel to work or get to school by train, by subway. They use public transportation. Well, it used to be a crime to urinate or defecate on the subway. People were arrested for that. They got a fine. No longer in New York City. It used to be a crime to what I refer to as aggressively panhandle. Aggressive panhandling is a robbery. I worked in the criminal justice system, and there is a difference between someone saying, "Do you have $1? I'm hungry," and coming up to you in an aggressive way and saying, "Give me $1." One is a crime, one is not. And when we decriminalize quality of life behavior, we open that door a little bit. And I don't see the world, I don't see my little world of family court and television court and small claims court, I don't see it getting better. I think when you marginalize good behavior by tolerating bad behavior, society loses. My education in the ways of social media have expanded over the last decade. I must admit that I am an idiot when it comes to the computer. I am a relatively successful person who has never turned on a computer. This is as far as I go with a computer. And I'm petrified that I'm going to touch a button and it's all going to disappear. My education in social media as a judge and the way people can abuse social media provides me with daily evidence of lack of responsibility, selfish, self-absorbed people who prefer to live in cyberspace than the real world, which enforces rules. I tried a case last month that hasn't aired yet. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. It was my experience in learning. The plaintiff was a young woman. She may have been a little challenged. The defendant was a young man. They found each other on a website called Tinder. Now, I didn't know what that was. The young man, who I might add, was wearing a tie. It was a bright blue tie, and he had dyed his hair to match. He explained to me that Tinder was a website where you swipe pictures until you get to something or someone that appeals to you. And if they swipe the same pictures, then you hook up. Now, I knew what that meant, but I played with him a bit and said, hooking up, you do that with a truck and a car and a cab. No, you know what I mean, Judge, hooking up. What this young man did was he proposed that the young woman, meet him at a restaurant at 9:30 in the evening, one of these fast foody kind of places, which she did. But unbeknownst to her, this was his business. He videotaped himself before she got there, and then videotaped her as she was coming into the restaurant. He had timed it so that the restaurant said, we're not serving any more food. So then they had to get into his car to go to another restaurant. Now, it's not that the young woman didn't realize that she was being videotaped, because he did, in fact, turn the camera, which he had on one of those sticks that everybody walks around with. And then he got into the car and put his phone, which was recording, in one of those holders that they have in a phone, in the car. What she didn't know, however, was that he was live streaming her for money. And she didn't realize that until, from the iPhone, you could hear people commenting about the way she looked and that she was overweight and nasty, horrible things. And then, so she realized at that point that whatever he was doing, and she wanted to get out of the car, and he didn't let her out of the car right away. In any event, it was, did you see it? It did disappear. It was an invasion of her privacy. That's what she was suing him for, because she was humiliated without her consent. And he paid dearly, because she had no notice. She had not given her permission, nor did she consent to be filmed and transmitted to the public at large. And he had something like 94 people who were paying. They pay his PayPal to do. And are any of you familiar with this? No? Oh, it was good. So it was not just new to me. He, on the other hand, had both consented to adjudicate his case on television, and he had knowledge that it would be broadcast. It was therefore my pleasure to humiliate him for a whole lot more money. In a perfect world, our doctors would be caring and sympathetic. In a perfect world, our religious leaders would be nurturing shepherds. In a perfect world, our teachers would love kids and want to teach. In a perfect world, our representatives would actually represent the people who elected them. And in a perfect world, our leaders would always speak presidentially. The world is not perfect. So the answer to my question, why Judge Judy, a quarter of a century later, and multiple generations who still tune in every day between 2 and 4, is perhaps the answer is that for an hour a day, the right thing happens. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. Are we sharing a glass, Rachel?
No, that's your glass. Okay, thank you, Your Honor. It is a delight to have you here in Cambridge. Thank you for coming all the way over here. And I'm sure loads of people in the audience have lovely questions to ask you. But I am going to start off, unfortunately for you guys. Start off with today, we're here at the Cambridge Union. So it's the oldest debating society in the world and the oldest free speech society in the world.
I'm having difficulty
Hearing. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. So we're at the Cambridge Union, the oldest debating and free speech society in the world. And we've seen recently that we have sort of civil, open discourse is being challenged by sort of protests and student activism at universities. Do you think that university campuses today are stifled by political correctness?
Yes. I think that young people protest because they have the energy to do that. And I think that Cambridge Union, and the only other one that I've spoken at in the UK is the Oxford Union, and I know that you are rivals. The reason I make the trip here, and it is a trip, is because you do welcome debate, and you may protest, but it's not in a myopic way. You can learn from people who have a different perspective, but today, on far too many college campuses, in my opinion, speech, with certain exceptions, cannot hurt you. It's not violence. It's a difference of opinion. And I very often equate the world to my family because that's what we're familiar with. You know, you're not familiar with the whole world, but you know what goes on in your family. And we have a large family. We have 5 children, they have 5 mates, and I will tell you they're at polar opposites of the political spectrum and the feelings about social stuff and gun control and abortion, and we talk civilly to one another. We argue. Sometimes we raise our voices. But at the end of the day, we love and respect each other. We're coming from good places. That's what's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen in the world is just that. You're supposed to listen to both sides. Maybe you'll learn something. But if you only watch the television programs that agree with you, if you only read the newspapers that agree with your position, that's just because you're a narcissistic fool. That's true. Because if you read what agrees, you say, oh, that's true, I'm smart. Look, that person says exactly what I think. I must be brilliant. As opposed to challenging yourself with perhaps, and we're not talking about radical speech. We're talking about just a difference of opinion. So I think the answer is yes. I do think that college campuses have become places of myopic thinking, and it's dangerous. So.
Okay, so following on from this point about reading newspapers that you agree with, I think it's a good sort of interlude into American politics today. So you talked about how in a perfect world we'd have leaders that act and speak presidentially. So of course, the natural question which we ask all of our speakers from America, what are your thoughts on the American political situation right now?
Interesting. You know, it's always difficult for let me start again. I think that celebrities, people who have celebrity, who get involved in politics, what they're really saying is my opinion matters more than yours, because I have a celebrity clothing line and I make movies, which is not true. But I never shy away from a question. So I will tell you, I think that America has to come to the center. And I think that the voices to the left, all the way to the left, and all the way to the right, is not the place where America should be. And I think, hopefully, it will come to the center. If you're asking me about the election that's coming up, I believe that if you have won an election, either to be mayor or governor or president of the United States, what's supposed to happen is, if you lost that election, you're supposed to spend the next 4 years finding the greatest candidate that can beat the incumbent. That's what you're supposed to do. And I think my judgment is, and it's just my judgment, so reject it, because it's no better than your judgment. I actually think that Michael Bloomberg would be a perfect presidential candidate. I will tell you why. Those folks at the left who were more centrist before this election process began, but now they are, what I see is that they're outlifting each other with free money, free education. Everybody gets $1,000. Everybody gets free medical care. Everybody gets free college tuition. Everybody gets. And where does all this getting come from? Well, that's not fleshed out really yet. And if you would like a person in the White House to be presidential all the time, speak presidentially, and come to the center, I like to see someone who has no skin in the game. And I think that Michael Bloomberg is that person. He's a man who has a lot of money that he made himself in a very straightforward way. He is an advocate of climate change awareness. He believes in reasonable gun control, I believe. He believes in making certain, I think, that the criminal element in society which impedes the day-to-day life of so many are treated fairly, but swiftly, and with a view towards protecting those law-abiding citizens whose lives are negatively impacted by their behavior. I believe all of that about him. And he was a great mayor of the city of New York for 12 years, and the city of New York is the ninth, I think, the 8th or 9th largest city in the world. So I don't know if that could happen, but I believe center is where we should be in the United States. And I can't think of anybody who would bring more comfort for the next 4 years. Because, you know, I don't know about the UK, whether you have the same kind of fracture as a result of your election. Do you?
Yes.
Well, that's a shame. Because fractured families don't flourish. And the loud voices on the right or the left shouldn't be the voices that control. It's unseemly. America is a young country as opposed to yours. You have pictures of kings. I just visited a church that was built in 1182 that's still standing and quite spectacular. We're a young country. We've been in existence for a couple of hundred years. And it would be a shame for our democracy to, and the pillars of what our democracy rests on, to be disrupted because the loudest voices are controlling the room. Anyway, that's what I think. Speech over. Next question.
Picking up on what you said about reasonable gun control, I guess it's kind of a simple question. What do you think constitutes a reasonable level of gun control?
I don't see any reason for any private citizen to have an assault weapon. You know, hunting has been part of life in your country and in America. So we have a Second Amendment. I don't think people who are crazy should have guns. Crazy, is that a PC word? I think people who are challenged should not have guns. I think that violent people who have demonstrated a history of violence should not have guns. And so I believe in very strong background checks for people before they are entitled to get a weapon. And I do believe that certain kinds of weapons that are capable of killing people en masse should be banned from individual use. That doesn't mean that your military can't have them, and even your police force. But there's no reason for an individual to have a weapon that's capable of killing 100 people in 60 seconds. Absolutely, I don't see a reason for that.
Okay, great. Moving on sort of into the idea of civil discourse, and sort of the promotion of public education, which is something that you're very involved in. I think one of the big issues today that's arisen with lawmakers and policymakers...
With what?
Lawmakers and
Lawmakers.
policymakers, is the lack of public awareness about the legal system and the law. So I guess my question is, do you think that this is a problem? And if so, how do we go about combating it?
Do I think that people don't understand the law? No, I think that people understand how the law has been functioning, how courts have been functioning, or not functioning, which is why I'm still in business. When I was a young lawyer practicing in the family court, we had some very abysmal jurists. And the one thing that a judge is supposed to do is make a decision. That's what you do. That's your job. You know, a doctor is supposed to diagnose what's wrong with you, and a judge is supposed to make a decision. And if, after often very lengthy proceedings, you leave a courtroom and neither side won or lost because the judge didn't feel like breaking a sweat to make a decision, that's not justice. So I think that people are all too familiar with the fact that justice, that the judicial system very often is fractured. I mean, it shouldn't make any difference, really, should it? Whether your case is whether you have a case in federal court and it's tried in New Jersey or in San Francisco, but it does. Forum shopping to get a different set of judges who have a different bias is inappropriate. I mean, there's only one justice. So I think that people, actually, these people understand what the court system is very well, even though there are a lot of people who think I'm on the Supreme Court. I'm not. They work much too hard. I think that most people's experience with courts has been frustrating because it takes too long. It takes too long, usually because of lazy judges I know that's a terrible thing to say. I shouldn't say that. Take that back. But it's true. As a judge, you are a public servant. And it was my experience when I sat in the family court and when I was the supervising judge in the Manhattan courts, in family court, that the judges who I supervised didn't understand that they were public servants. They thought that the public was there to service them. And I would try to explain to them, court starts at 9:15. You have the waiting room full of people. Get your behind down to the bench at 9:15, not 11, not 10:30, not sitting. You want to sit up in your chambers and ponder the decisions of the day, get to work at 8 o'clock. Ponder all you like. But your job, those people out there pay your salary, not the other way around. Anyway, I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question that's quite interesting to me. So you've previously said that you would never refer to yourself as a feminist. And as someone whose main personality trait is probably being a feminist, I guess my question is, why do you reject that label?
I do reject the label because I never felt as if I needed a community of women to move my career along. I was a lawyer. I happened to be a woman. I happen to be Jewish. So there's a Women's Bar Association. There's a Women's Jewish Judges Bar Association. I said, I'm just a lawyer. So I joined the Bar Association. And then there was, when I got to be a judge, which had nothing to do with other women, it had to do with Ed Koch. And he became the mayor of the city of New York, and he got rid of this political stuff that made you judge, and he did something quite unique. He formed a mayor's committee on the judiciary and would only entertain those people who the judiciary screening committee said to him, these are 5 worthy candidates, pick one. I really didn't know him, and my husband nor I were political beings. So I got to be a judge, not based on a group. So I didn't join the Women Judges Association. I certainly didn't get my present job because I was a woman. I got my present job because somebody saw a piece on 60 Minutes and said, gee, she's got some entertainment quality. Let's see, maybe she'll be okay. I certainly didn't realize the success and the good fortune that I have and been able to negotiate because I'm a woman. So I reject the fact that I needed to be bolstered by any organization. I certainly don't want pay parity with any of the people that I work with. So I reject the fact that, for me, anything that I accomplished was as a result of anything other than my own tenacity. I don't say talent, I say tenacity. That doesn't mean that other women aren't comforted by the sisterhood of having organizations. And I don't scoff that. I think that that's fine if that's what you need to be in your comfort zone. I came from a different time. I wasn't offended when I walked into a courtroom as a young lawyer and the judge said to me, nice legs. I said, thank you. I understand that times are different and you have to grow. And so I think women today are spectacular, and I think that the need for, there was a time when you needed organization. Certainly you needed organization to get the right to vote. You needed organization to, you now still, the protests with regard to equal pay for women who do the same jobs. So I do think that there is a place for a group, because a group pressures can sometimes move organizations, just as you young people protest on your universities. You have something that is holy to you, and you want your voice to be heard. Well, if you stand out there and you have one sign, nobody's going to listen to you. So you hope that it's a larger voice. So I still think that there are some issues today where women still need a group voice. I just didn't.
Okay, great. I think with that, thank you, Your Honor. We're going to wrap up the moderated portion of the Q&A, and we're going to move on to audience Q&A, as I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions they want to ask. As usual, all guests are reminded, please wait until the mic gets to you before you start speaking, otherwise it's not going to pick up on our audio system. So, should we start with there in the back row?
Are you not worried that by... Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, my hearing is challenged, so you're going to have to speak.
I'm sorry. Are you not worried that by likening children to rotten fruit, you stigmatise and marginalise a group of minors that can't be held responsible for their actions in the same way that the adults that you try and court are?
Could you repeat that with the
No,
mic?
you tell me.
Basically, here's some of the gist. Are you not worried that by likening children to rotten fruit, you stigmatize and marginalize minors who can't be held accountable in the way that the adults that you try on your show can be?
Very good question. Is that Kyle? Okay. I like analogy. If I were to say to a group, bad children should be removed from a classroom so that good children are able to learn, because teachers can't control one or two bad children, and also teach the 35 children that their mission to teach. If I said that to you, you would forget it. But you will never forget my moldy blueberry. And I'm not marginalizing anything. I'm going to be 77 years old in a couple of weeks, and I will tell you that healthy blueberries cannot cure a moldy blueberry. The only thing that happens is that children who really are in school and thirsty for knowledge are getting shortchanged by the bad behavior of a few. Now, if what you're saying to me is, listen, society should look into the root causes of the bad behavior of a few, well, actually, I addressed that in my speech. We've spent trillions. It comes down to responsible behavior. It comes down to parenting. It's not the place of the school to teach behavior. It's the home that teaches behavior. It's not the school where you learn morality. It's from the knee of your parents. People should not have kids unless they're emotionally, financially mature enough to parent and teach them the things that they're supposed to know in order to be good citizens. And if you say that, well, if the parents fail, then who does it turn to? And it comes to a wider community to try to figure out how to fix it. It has sadly been my experience that schools can only do one thing. They can teach. They can teach you reading, writing, arithmetic. They can teach you history. They can teach you chemistry. Well, they couldn't teach me chemistry, but they can teach people chemistry. But they can't teach being good people. And that responsibility rests with parents. That responsibility should come from the home. That's a very conservative view. Well, it's mine. So I accept the fact that there are people who say that as a welcoming, caring society, we have to figure out what to do with the moldy blueberry. But I have come to believe that it is the wrong thing for a society to give up on 35 healthy blueberries in order to try to figure out how to make the moldy blueberry well. Hasn't worked.
Okay. At the back.
And Rachel's going to be my interpreter.
You mentioned the Supreme Court. We're in the age of reality television American politics. When do you expect to be nominated for the Supreme Court? And would you be successful, and would the Senate confirm you if you were nominated?
The answer is no, no, and no. That's an honest answer. I don't have I am not sufficiently academically inquisitive to sit on the highest court. I'm a meat and potatoes girl. I'm a meat and potatoes Brooklyn girl. And you have to be more academically inquisitive than I am. So that's number one. The second point, and even more important than that, let's say I was academically inquisitive. I spent my entire career without ruling by committee. I like being the queen. I like to hear all the evidence and then make a decision that I think is right. I don't have to say, do you agree with me? What about you? Do you agree with me? So, to me, rule by committee is a monumental waste of time. And that's very often what it is. I just saw a play, by the way, called Sisters-in-Law. And it was a two-women play about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who were sisters-in-law and who had very different approaches to their position on the Supreme Court. The play, at least, portrays Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first woman to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States, as a very principled gal, but she believed that you had to get a consensus. You had to sort of bring along the dummy guys to your side. You had to, you got the feeling from the play that she felt as if these guys were nice guys, but they weren't all that swift. And in order to have a majority, she needed to give here a little bit, and massage here a little bit, and canoodle here a little bit. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, on the other hand, was a bull. She said, we have to attack this case, and we have to attack it front and center. And Sandra Day O'Connor says, if you attack it front and center, you're going to be writing a minority opinion. If you try to gather consensus, and we do it slowly, then eventually the court will come around. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in principle, was correct, but she still had to get a rule by the committee, a majority of the committee, and that would drive me out of my mind. So, Supreme Court is not where I'm going.
Can Can we have in the balcony? Can we have in the balcony the blue?
I would like to say thank you, first of all, for your amazing talk. It was really inspiring.
Thank you for your talk. Thank you for your amazing talk.
I thought it was interesting that you say that there's different scenarios for different educations, such as your parenting has a different educational responsibility to the classroom, to the community. And I want to ask you one question. Do you think if children had the freedom to learn and inquire what is love, respect, fair and just within the classroom and within society, the classrooms could change from infectious disruption to a healthy learning discussion?
Oh, that's a long question. You're going to have to summarize that for me.
It's quite difficult. So you said that the educational environment of the home is different to that of the classroom, in the sense of what they're supposed to teach. So I think the question is, sorry, you're going to need to repeat that as the last bit as well.
It's okay. If in school the children could inquire what is love, respect, just and fair in the classroom and in society, would it turn from infectious disruption to a healthy learning discussion?
So if in school we began to teach the values that you're saying should be taught in the home, so love, respect, justice, etc., do you think that would be an effective way of solving societal ills, essentially?
Eventually you go home, is my answer. And you start in the home. Before you go to school, you're 2 years old, you're 3 years old, you're 4 years old. You watch your parent take something that doesn't belong to them. You watch your parent have a cold drink in the car, open up the car window and toss the waste out of the car window. You take the subway with your parent and they hop over the turnstile or push through the door without paying. You're home and you're 4 and the phone rings and your mother says, "Tell them I'm not home." That's where you learn. And then you go to school, and you're in school from 9 to 3 or 9 to 2, and then you go back home. There are only so many hours that a school has. You want the school to do everything, and it can't. It's not possible in 5 hours to teach what children have to learn academically and also to teach them how to be good people. It's a lovely fantasy, but it's not a reality. And I believe in my soul that in order to make any real change, people have to come to the center and say, this is possible and realistic, this and doable, and this is really now not possible. And it's not possible for schools to be both parent and educator. You can have a teacher who you admire and who can inspire you, but at the end of the day, somebody to teach you that if you want a life cycle, you have to dream, you have to achieve, and then you have to inspire. First you dream, then you achieve, and then you inspire. That's the cycle. And teachers can only do that to a couple of kids if they have a good classroom. They can't do everything.
Okay. I think with that, we're unfortunately going to have to wrap up, which is really disappointing, I'm sure, for everyone in the room. Their hands raised. Just a couple of reminders. Please stay in your seats as the judge and I exit, as we have a couple of pointers about our term card for everyone. And thank you, everyone, for attending the first talk.
Thank you
of
for being
Michaelmas
such a good
2019.
audience. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.